In 2017, residents in a rural area heard a desperate cry echoing from deep inside an abandoned well and discovered a bobcat and a cougar trapped at the bottom of a deep, narrow shaft. The animals had wandered too close to human property and, in the confusion, slipped into the well with no way out. The cougar, likely drawn by the bobcat's frantic calls, had also ended up trapped at the bottom of the same shaft, leaving two stressed wild cats with no way out and limited time before exhaustion set in. Both were spent, struggling to stay afloat, their instincts to flee or fight rendered useless against slick rock walls and icy water. To get them out, someone would have to descend into that well, right into the striking range of two terrified predators. What happened next would test the limits of human courage, and nothing about it went the way anyone expected. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The first call came in just after sunrise, the kind of morning when the world still feels half asleep and every sound carries. Boots crunching on frost, a gate latch clinking, a dog barking once and then going quiet. In a rural patchwork of pasture and scrub, a man named Mark was loading tools into the back of his truck when his phone rang. The caller was a neighbor whose voice didn't match the calm morning. "There's something in the old well," the neighbor said. It's alive." Mark had lived in that area long enough to know what the old well meant. Everyone did. It sat behind a line of cedar and briar, a relic from an earlier homestead, narrow and deep, the kind of place you warned kids away from. Over time, the lid had rotted, the boards had warped, and the opening, half hidden by weeds, had become a silent hazard. "What is it?" Mark asked, already walking toward his truck. "A wildcat," the neighbor said. "A bobcat. I heard it crying." That single word, crying, hit Mark in the chest. Not because he imagined a pet, not because he forgot it was dangerous, but because he'd worked around wildlife enough to understand what desperation sounded like. He had volunteered at rescues, helped move injured deer off roads, escorted owls into carriers, and once assisted wildlife officers with a trapped coyote. He knew the difference between an animal that wants to fight and an animal that has started to fail. He drove fast, but not reckless. Dust rose behind him as he cut down a dirt lane, passing fence posts and winter-yellowed grass. When he arrived, there were already a few trucks and a cluster of neighbors standing back in a loose semicircle. Nobody was close to the well. Even from a distance, you could feel the tension, like an invisible electric line. Mark parked and stepped out. He didn't rush the last few yards. He approached the way you approach a scene with wildlife. Steady, quiet, eyes scanning for movement. Then he heard it. A hoarse, raspy sound that didn't quite match the bobcats he'd heard at night. It was lower, strained, interrupted by pauses that sounded like the animal had to gather breath to keep going. From somewhere down in that narrow shaft came the scrape of claws against stone. Then a splash. Mark stopped at the edge of the group, still several yards away from the opening. "How deep?" he asked. "No idea," an older rancher said. "Deep enough to lose a bucket." A woman held her arms tight across her chest. "We looked down," she said, voice trembling. It's awful. There's water down there. Not much, but enough. And the bobcats, it's trying to stay up on the side." Mark's eyes went to the well. The opening was about the width of a large trash can, narrower than comfort. The rim was cracked concrete. Weeds leaned over it like curious onlookers. It looked deceptively small and harmless until you imagined dropping into it. "Wildlife officers are coming," someone said, "but they're 40 minutes out." Mark nodded, but his attention snagged on a sound that wasn't the bobcat. Beneath the rasping cry was another, deeper rumble, more like a breath forced through a tight chest. Mark felt the hairs lift on his arms. "There's another animal down there," he said. The group went quiet. One man, pale, nodded slowly. "I didn't want to say it," he admitted, "but I think I saw a tail, long, thicker." Mark didn't lean over. He'd learned that lesson young. You don't put your face above a trapped predator. You don't give it a target. You also don't risk losing balance on an old rim. He crouched several feet back, reached for a long branch someone had cut, and eased it toward the opening until he could see a reflection in the water below. It took his eyes a second to adjust, but then the shape resolved. A bobcat clung to a rough spot on the stone, forelegs shaking, hindquarters slipping, its coat darkened with wet. And below it, half submerged, shoulders pressed into the narrowness, was a cougar. Not a small one. The cougar's ears were pinned back, and its eyes were wide, reflecting light in two pale coins. It wasn't thrashing the way panic would suggest. It was conserving energy, chest rising and falling in slow, hard pulls. In a shaft that narrow, there was nowhere for it to turn, nowhere to climb. The bobcat above it seemed to be the only thing keeping its own paws from touching the water for long. The scene didn't make sense at first. Bobcats and cougars share territory, yes. They avoid each other when they can. A cougar can kill a bobcat. But nature is full of strange alignments when fear and exhaustion strip away the usual rules. Mark pictured the bobcat slipping in first, the sudden drop, the frantic calls echoing up the stone like a siren. He pictured the cougar nearby, maybe passing through, maybe drawn by the sound, perhaps curious, perhaps opportunistic. In the confusion of brush and broken boards, it could have stepped on the wrong patch of ground and fallen in two. Now two predators were trapped together, both too tired to fight, both too cramped to assert dominance. And the clock was ticking. "Okay," Mark said, rising slowly. "Everyone stays back. No kids, no dogs, nobody leans over." A few people nodded vigorously, grateful someone sounded like he had a plan. Within minutes, the first wildlife officials arrived. 2 trucks, then a trailer with equipment. They spoke to the neighbors quickly, then approached the well with careful, professional restraint. One officer, a woman with sun-browned skin and a calm voice, introduced herself. "Mark?" she asked. "They said you've got experience." "Some," he answered. "Not with this." "No one has," she said, letting a small, humorless breath escape. She peered down the shaft without leaning far. Her expression tightened when she saw the cougar. "2 cats," she murmured. "That complicates everything." A veterinarian arrived soon after, a man with a hard case of supplies and a face that showed both urgency and caution. He listened as the officer described the depth, the water, the narrowness. "We can sedate," he said, then shook his head before anyone could argue. "But not here, not both. In water like that, sedation is a gamble. If either of them goes under, we lose them." "So what?" someone asked from the group. "We do nothing?" The officer turned and raised her voice so everyone could hear. "We're not doing nothing. We're going to extract, but we do it awake, and we do it safely, which means we slow down and we do it right." She looked at Mark. "We have a metal cage system. It's not a full descent, just enough to get someone partway down, stabilized. We'll run a rope harness and a pole loop. The goal is to secure the Bobcat first, lift it out, then secure the Cougar. Mark felt his stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with the well. The plan was logical. It was also terrifying. The officer watched his face. "You don't have to volunteer," she said. "We have staff trained for this." Mark looked down at the well again. The Bobcat's paws slipped, then caught. Its head tipped back, mouth open in a sound that barely carried. For a moment, it looked less like a predator and more like a drowning child clinging to the edge of a pool. Mark swallowed. "I'll help," he said quietly, "if you need an extra pair of hands." They moved into action with the kind of tight coordination that comes from people who've done dangerous work before. The equipment came out: thick ropes, pulleys, a tripod system anchored solidly, a metal cage platform designed to keep a rescuer from brushing the shaft walls, gloves, helmets, a long pole with a loop at the end, sturdy, controlled, meant for guiding and catching without grabbing. Mark let them harness him. Chest strap, leg strap, safety line clipped twice, checked twice. The officer didn't just glance at the knots. She tested them, tugging with force. The vet stood by, not sedating, but ready with emergency measures, ready to respond if either cat began to crash from hypothermia or shock. Before he approached, Mark turned to the group of neighbors. Some of them were elderly, standing stiffly in coats and hats, eyes fixed on the opening with the kind of worry that doesn't make noise. He saw his own father's face in one of the men, creased, tired, deeply human. "This is going to look scary," Mark said gently, "but we're doing it step by step. I need you all to stay back and stay quiet. The calmer it is up here, the calmer it is down there." They nodded, hands clasped, breath held. Mark stepped onto the metal cage platform. The rope creaked. The pulley system tightened. He felt the lift of his weight as the cage edged over the opening and began to lower, slowly, steadily, a controlled descent into a narrow throat of stone. The air changed as he went down. It was cooler, damp, carrying that underground smell, wet rock, old leaves, something metallic. The light above shrank from a wide circle to a smaller, brighter ring. Shadows moved across the walls as the cage passed. He didn't go all the way down. The plan was to stop him above the animal's reach, close enough to guide, but far enough to avoid a strike. Even exhausted, those cats could lunge. Claws and teeth don't need much room. When he was close enough to see clearly, his breath caught. Up close, the bobcat's ribs showed faintly through wet fur. Its whiskers drooped, and its eyes, golden and furious, flicked to him with a mix of fear and defiance. It hissed, a weak sound that still carried warning. The cougar below was bigger than Mark had realized. Its shoulders filled the shaft. Its paws were braced awkwardly, muscles trembling with effort. Its eyes locked onto Mark, and for a second, Mark felt something ancient stir in his chest. Not a romantic thrill, a primal recognition. This was a creature built to hunt deer, to take down prey larger than itself, and it was trapped like a helpless thing. Mark did what he'd been taught to do around stressed wildlife. He spoke low, not soothing like a baby, not patronizing, just steady, predictable. "Hey," he murmured. "Easy, easy." He guided the pole loop toward the bobcat first. The bobcat snapped at the air, not quite reaching, claws scraping stone. Mark's heart pounded so hard he felt it in his throat. He forced himself to move slowly. Fast movements trigger panic. Panic triggers strikes. The loop had to go over the bobcat's body in a way that wouldn't choke it, a placement that could be tightened into a harness-like hold. The wildlife officer above coached him, voice coming down the shaft like a lifeline. A little left. Good. Now wait for it to settle. Don't push. The bobcat's paws slipped again and it yowled. One sharp, desperate sound that echoed up the stone. The cougar below flinched, then lifted its head higher, eyes widening, as if that cry had pulled it from a fog. Mark's stomach tightened. If the cougar lunged upward in panic, it could knock the bobcat loose. It could strike. It could tangle the ropes. "Stay with me," Mark whispered, not sure who he was talking to, the bobcat, the cougar, or himself. He waited. The bobcat froze, sides heaving. He eased the loop down, guiding it carefully around the bobcat's torso. The bobcat tried to twist away, but the narrowness worked in their favor. There was only so much space to fight. "Now," the officer called. "Tighten, just enough. Don't cinch too hard." Mark adjusted the rope. The loop snugged into place. The bobcat snarled, then sagged, too tired to keep thrashing. Mark signaled upward with a tug on the line. "Hoist," the officer ordered. The rope above tightened and the bobcat lifted, slowly, steadily, rising like a dark, dripping bundle out of the well. The bobcat's legs kicked once, then folded in. It was alive. It was coming up. Mark kept the pole between himself and the cougar as the bobcat passed above him. He watched it disappear into the circle of daylight, and he heard the neighbors gasp. Then a small, involuntary sound of relief, like a prayer leaving someone's lungs. But there was no time to celebrate. Now it was just Mark and the cougar. The cougar shifted, pressing its weight into the narrow walls, as if trying to climb by sheer will. Water lapped at its belly. Mark could see tremors in its shoulders. The animal's breathing was loud in the confined shaft, each inhale scraping. The officer's voice came down again, calmer than seemed possible. "We need the cage. We're lowering a larger harness. Mark, you guide, same as before. Stay out of reach." A larger loop was lowered, thicker rope, broader cradle. The cougar watched it descend with intense focus, not attacking, but tracking. Mark wondered with a sudden ache if the cougar had stopped seeing humans as enemies and started seeing them as the only chance left. The harness reached Mark's hands. He used the pole to guide it, inch by inch, trying to get it around the cougar's chest and shoulders. The cougar's ears flattened, tail twitching in the water. Its mouth opened in a low growl that vibrated up the walls. Mark's throat went dry. In the narrow shaft, that growl felt bigger than the animal, bigger than the stone, bigger than the morning. He moved the loop closer. The cougar lunged, not upward, not at Mark's face, but sideways, snapping at the rope. Its teeth caught fibers, and for a moment it tugged, furious, as if determined to destroy the thing that dared touch it. "Hold," the officer commanded. "Let it bite. Don't fight it." Mark held steady, arms burning, keeping the rope taut but not jerking. If he yanked back, he'd trigger a stronger attack. If he let go, the cougar could tangle the lines. Seconds stretched long. Then the cougar paused. Its jaw loosened. It let the rope go. The animal's eyes blinked slowly, and for the first time, Mark saw something else there. Exhaustion so deep it looked like sadness. Mark used that moment. He eased the harness around the cougar's body, sliding it under the chest as best as he could, positioning it so the lift would support without choking. The cougar hissed, then stilled, as if it had run out of anger. "Now tighten," the officer said, voice steady but edged with urgency. Mark tightened carefully. The harness set. He signaled upward. "Hoist!" the officer called. The rope above pulled, and the cougar rose. At first it was slow, and Mark feared the harness would slip. But it held. The cougar's paws scraped the walls. Water streamed off its fur. Its body trembled, muscles firing in useless climbing motions. The shaft was so narrow that the cougar's shoulders brushed rock, sending little showers of grit down onto Mark's helmet. He kept his pole up, ready, eyes fixed on the harness points. He held his breath as the cougar passed him, close enough that he could smell its wet fur and the sharpness of its fear. Then it was above him, and then it was gone, lifted into daylight. Mark heard something he didn't expect. Cheering. Not loud, not reckless, but a wave of voices breaking into relieved sobs and shaky laughter. He heard a woman say, "Oh, thank God," over and over. He heard someone clap a hand against someone else's shoulder like they were grounding themselves in reality. And then he heard the wildlife officer again, firm, "Quiet, quiet, we're not done until they're secured." Because up top, a wet cougar is still a cougar. Mark stayed in the shaft until the officer told him it was safe. He listened to muffled commands, the shifting of a transport cage, the heavy thump of metal. He imagined the cougar's eyes, the way they must look now, wide and wild in the open air after that narrow darkness. Finally, the rope tightened and he began to rise. When Mark emerged, the morning light hit his face like a warm hand. He blinked hard, breathing fresh air, and for a second he felt dizzy. Not from height, but from the sudden return to normal space after being inside that stone throat. The Bobcat was in a secure carrier, its sides rising and falling fast. A towel had been placed over part of the crate to reduce stress. The cougar was contained in a heavier transport cage, the kind used for dangerous large carnivores. It paced once, then stopped, staring through the bars with a look that made the entire crowd take an instinctive step back. The vet moved quickly, checking both animals without unnecessary contact. Eyes, breathing, visible wounds. There were abrasions on paws, scratches along flanks. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to tell the story of hours of struggle. Both animals were dehydrated, stressed, chilled from the water. "We're transporting them to rehab," the officer announced. "They'll get fluids, treatment, observation. We won't release until they're stable." The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the cages were loaded into trucks. Many of them had come expecting a grim outcome. Rural folks, especially older ones, don't always expect miracles. They live close enough to hard realities to know nature doesn't play fair. But this morning, they had watched people and wild animals meet at the edge of disaster and choose together a different ending. The rehabilitation facility was not a place of sentimentality. It was a place of work. Quiet halls, clean enclosures, careful handling, strict protocols. The Bobcat was placed in a warm, darkened space to reduce stress. It received fluids, its abrasions cleaned, its body temperature monitored. The cougar was given the same: fluids, wound care, calm containment. Staff moved with practiced efficiency, speaking softly, keeping lights low. Over the next days, the Bobcat's eyes sharpened again. It ate. It groomed. It stopped hugging the back corner like a shadow. It began to pace with purpose, a sign of returning strength. The cougar, too, recovered. Hydration improving, muscles relaxing, breathing calming. It remained wary, watching staff with a steady, unmistakable wildness. Mark visited once, not to touch, not to take pictures, but to look from a distance and confirm what his heart needed to believe. They had made it. He stood beside a staff member as they checked the Bobcat's enclosure. The Bobcat looked up, ears pivoting, eyes bright. For a moment, it held Mark's gaze through the mesh. Mark didn't pretend it recognized him, but he did feel something ease inside his chest, a knot he hadn't known he'd tied that morning. The cougar was harder to see. It stayed back, shadowed, its presence heavy even when still. The staff member spoke quietly. "That one's strong," she said. "It'll go back out, far from here." And that mattered. Because the goal of rescue is not to keep the wild wildcat. The goal is to return it to wildness, intact. A week later, after veterinary clearance, the Bobcat was released first. It was transported to suitable habitat far from neighborhoods, thick cover, prey availability, water sources. The crate was set down. The door opened. The Bobcat hesitated, sniffed the air, then bolted like a streak of living dusk, vanishing into brush without looking back. Some people cried anyway. Another day, the cougar was released separately, deeper into rugged terrain where it could avoid people. The crate door opened. The cougar stepped out slow and deliberate, head low, nostrils flaring. It paused once, scanning the trees, the rocks, the sky. Then it moved forward, silent as breath, and disappeared into the wild as if it had never been trapped, as if it had never needed help. Back in the rural community, the well became the subject of hard conversations. Not blame, just responsibility. The officer gathered the neighbors and explained what they all knew now. "This can't happen again," she said. "Not to wildlife, not to livestock, not to a child." Within days, the community worked together. Men brought concrete and rebar. Someone donated a heavy steel grate. Others cleared brush so the well would never be hidden again. They secured the opening properly, built a barrier, posted a warning sign that didn't feel like bureaucracy. It felt like a promise. For weeks afterward, Mark found himself waking at night, hearing in memory the Bobcat's strained cry echoing in stone. He'd close his eyes and see the cougar's eyes shining in the dark, see wet fur, trembling paws, the narrowness of the shaft. In those moments, he had to remind himself, it ended differently. It ended with two wild hearts back in their rightful home. On a quiet evening later that year, Mark stood on his porch watching the sky turn purple over the fields. An older neighbor walked up the drive, hands in pockets, moving slowly the way older bodies do. "You did a brave thing," the man said. Mark shook his head. "We all did. Everyone stayed back. Everyone called for help. Everyone worked together." The neighbor nodded. "Still, somebody had to go down." Mark didn't answer right away. He thought about the Bobcat, the cougar, the way fear had turned into stillness, the way a community had held its breath together. He thought about how people often imagine wildlife rescue as a heroic moment, when most of it is actually patience, caution, and respect. "I didn't do it because I'm fearless," Mark finally said. "I did it because they were alive. And if something is alive, you try." The neighbor looked out over the darkening pasture. "Funny thing," he said softly. "We spend so much time teaching ourselves that wild things don't belong near us. And that's true. But sometimes wild things remind us what we're supposed to be too." Mark felt his throat tighten. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. Somewhere out beyond the tree line, the bobcat moved through brush, silent and watchful, back where it belonged. Somewhere deeper in rugged country, the cougar traveled a ridge at dusk, the wind carrying scents of deer and pine. They would never know the names of the humans who pulled them from darkness. They wouldn't repay anyone with loyalty or gratitude the way a dog might. But that wasn't the point. The point was that in a narrow stone throat where two predators had been reduced to trembling survivors, humans chose not to turn away. They chose calm over panic, teamwork over spectacle, and courage that didn't shout. And in a small rural community, older folks who had seen plenty of harsh endings got to witness something rare. A morning where fear didn't win. A morning where a bobcat and a cougar, two animals built for wild independence, were given a second chance, not because they became less wild, but because people respected their wildness enough to save it. Long after the well was sealed and the trucks had left and the story had spread across diner counters and church steps, what remained was simpler than drama. A quiet truth that settles deepest in the hearts of those who've lived a long time. Sometimes the most astonishing thing isn't that a man climbed into a well. It's that a whole community stood back, held steady, and chose compassion, so two frightened wild cats could climb out, breathe again, and disappear into the wide, waiting world.